Hello and welcome to Family Album. My name is Gail Lowe and I am your host, and today we have with us Howard Hart, a Wakefield resident and founder of Opera Club of Wakefield. And Howard today is going to talk with us about his passion, which would be opera, and I think he will be very interesting to hear and learn about what inspired him in the very beginning to enjoy such a fine art as opera. So I'll turn the microphone, metaphorically speaking, over to you, Howard. What can you tell us about your early beginnings?
Yes, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much for asking me to do this. I think that maybe the best way to start is to talk about my grandparents, because they were two of probably really the most important people in my life. My grandfather, Howard Gillespie, was my father's father. He was, my father's mother died, and he was taken in by his aunt and my grandfather, Howard Gillespie, who would be his, her husband. And he lived in Malden, and my grandmother, who was a wonderful, wonderful woman, and probably the person I've loved the most in my life, Florence Lord, lived in North Reading. The magic is very similar, and it's really where I think my experience of who I am today started. It started 3 or 4 years old. I remember being at my grandfather's house in Malden, and he smoked these wonderful pipes, and the room smelled of pipe tobacco, and he had a great place. It was just like a fantasy world, and I loved going there. And from the time I was very young, I visited my grandfather, and eventually I ended up helping him make postcards. He was a photographer for the Freedom Trail in Boston. In the 40s and 50s, he had, in those days, they didn't have the mass marketing they have today. He would make postcards for the Freedom Trail, and I would help him make those postcards. I discovered these round things made of shellac in my grandfather's attic called 78 RPM records. And he had a wind-up machine. I'm not making this up, this is true. And I was 4 years old, and I asked my grandfather if I could play I still remember putting the shellac recording on the wind-up machine. This was 1949, and I played this record by Enrico Caruso, and I went, oh, this is for me. This is for me. This is what I like. I don't know what it is, but and so my grandfather would let me just take the records out of the attic, and before he knew it, I had his living room filled with all these shellac records. And he was himself an amateur violinist. He was a photographer at a time when there weren't a lot of cameras, so he made his living making the postcards and other photographs that he sold. And he knew Geraldine Farrar, who was a famous opera singer who who grew up in Melrose, eventually went to the Metropolitan Opera and sang with Caruso. So he had all these wonderful stories to tell me, and I loved him. I loved being around him, and he was a lot of fun. And he encouraged me in a very large way to love opera. So that was very important for me, and that's where it began. And interestingly enough, my grandmother, who lived in North Reading, on the second floor of her house were these same shellac records with different singers and sometimes the same singers. And I was, again, 5, 6 years old, and I used to go there on the weekends. I loved to go there, and that's where I learned that I could kind of do whatever I wanted. She was she loved me and I loved her, and I could just play those records all day long, which I did. And that's also where I became very much involved in reading. By that time I was 7 or 8 maybe, with Sherlock Holmes, which is another one of my great loves, murder mysteries and mysteries. So I read a lot of Sherlock Holmes. And so those were the early days that I believe made me who I am today in my 8th decade of life. I still think about them. The Opera Club is very much about them, remembering what they've meant to me in my life. And I feel like they're with me in some strange way when I'm here and we're doing the opera club, I really feel like my grandparents are here. Yeah.
What a wonderful feeling that must be for you, to
It's
have them
wonderful.
right here with us. And it would be such an honor for them to know that you're talking about their inspiration of music for you and how it impacted your life. And not only your life, Howard, but the lives of people in Wakefield who come to your opera club. And it's held right here in the library, isn't it? In this
Yes, it
very
is.
room,
Yeah.
isn't it? And you mentioned Sherlock Holmes. I understand that the library also has a sleuth night, sleuth and mystery
do.
night.
They do.
And you
Wonderful
come
group.
to that?
Wonderful, wonderful. The people who come to Supper Sleuths, it's once a month, the meeting. They know so much, all of them. It's sort of amazing. They know so much about mysteries, and many of them have been reading the mysteries for many years, and they know so much about it. And I find it's like a new door for me. Always, it's never too late to be what you might have been. And recently, a very close friend of mine said to me, and I consider this perhaps one of the most important things I've heard in my life, because I'd like to think it's true. I like to reinvent. My whole life has been about reinvention. You know, I grew up in Wakefield. I graduated in 1963. I wrote my senior theme upstairs before whiteout. I had to retype the pages over. I see some smiling. I know, truly, it was before they invented whiteout, and they didn't have any of the white strips, you know, any of that stuff. So I kept retyping and retyping. I got an A-.
Good for you,
It was
Howard.
written on Chartres Cathedral. I remember my English teacher, she said, "You're really an interesting person. This is the first time anyone ever wrote a senior theme on a French cathedral. I love this. This is really something." I always felt very, I was very quiet in high school, very much to myself. I remember in my sophomore year in high school, something I wanted to share with you. I was taking music appreciation, and the teacher asked me to present Carmen. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you have recordings of Carmen." I said, "Yes." In those days, I had the Risa Stevens recording with Reiner. He said, "Bring the records and you'll talk about Carmen." And it was my first experience of presenting an opera, you know, to other people, in the sense of sharing that music with them and talking about it. And I was, 17 years old. It was a wonderful experience. And then I worked in the music business for a long time. That was my first career.
I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, from what I can remember, it was a music business. I see some more smiling. Yes, it's all true. I got a job. I was 18 years old. I got a job at Craze Music in Boston, which was at that time, there were 4 or 5 Craze Musics stores. And I was very fortunate. I went there, I was 18 years old. They liked me. I was there about 3 weeks, and there was some problem with the manager. And the fellow who was running, I still remember him very clearly. He said, "You're the manager of the store now." I said, "I'm only 18 years old. I don't know what I'm doing." He said, "The person who you're replacing didn't either. You'll be fine." So I stayed. And that was my first job in the music business. And many, many, many of my friends, and I wouldn't mention names because there were so many of them, that I love very much. They're all connected to them through music. So I stayed in the music business, and then when I was 30, I moved to New York. I was living in Harvard Square, and I moved to New York, and magic happened. Somebody asked me recently, I've been back in Wakefield for 5 years, why I left New York, and I said, it's like, it was the greatest love affair that when it ended, I left with such grace, and it loved me still. And I would go back to New York. It's my second home. I'm given my age, I lived half of my life in Boston, half in New York. And New York was very good to me. I had a program at WKCR. I was a guest host at Columbia University and interviewed opera singers. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stuff. And went on to promote recordings through classical labels, mostly import. That was a wonderful experience also. I've had a very blessed life. And since this is family album, something that I thought about this morning before I came here is how large the family is. It's not all biological. And so many people in my life have become my family. I have two sisters, Marsha and Kathy, who live in Wakefield, and my brother lives up in Maine. I say that like it's about a zillion miles away, but he lives in Maine. And that's about, you can tell I lived in the city most of my life. So, but family is so much larger, the logical family, right? The larger family, and how we are families with each other.
That's right, and family is so important, Howard, to all of us. So I'd like to know more about your love affair with opera and how your early beginnings with your grandfather and your grandmother launched you into your current love affair with opera.
That's a very good question. It was the perfect timing. It was something I wanted to say at some point. Music is the great healer in a time. It's not that, our times in some ways are troubled, but there has always been something going on that hasn't been ideal. Music is a great healer, whatever kind of music you listen to, and people who love music, I think everyone I've ever been close to loves some type of music. Music is essential in my life. And of the things I've loved in my life, if at the end of all of this, when the great maker takes me away, I will think that the thing that I've loved so many people in my life. I can't even start to think of how many people I've loved. And I've learned how to live a positive rather than negative life. And that I owe to other people, not to myself, but to other people that have been very important in my life. But somehow the opera was the thing that got me through the most difficult periods. When I was in the music business, I was in my 30s and 40s, and there was a thing called Napster. I don't know if you remember Napster, but they started to download. At that point, I was involved a lot with, in a great deal with recordings on CD and DVD. So there was that transition from LP. So I was, at 57 years old, I went back to school. You're never too late to be what you might have been again. So I went back to school. I worked 5 days a week, went to school 3 nights a week, and on the weekends, and studied psychology. So psychology and music are very close.
How
because
so?
It's all about feelings, really. So, right?
So you meet here the fourth Saturday of the month, and you talk about opera. Are there any favorites that people want to hear about?
Interestingly enough, that's a good question. In the 3 years that we've had the opera club here, and I always want to remind myself to say we and not I with this, because it's an opera club with wonderful people. The opera club has grown and grown as far as attendance, but we have a nucleus of about 15 people who are always here. The library tells me if you last over 2 years, then you're pretty much good to go. And we just did, in August, in the middle of the summer, we had 40 people for the Maria Callas tribute that I did personally. It was with video and audio recordings. So the two most popular singers for our opera club undoubtedly are Luciano Pavarotti and Maria Callas. And I do have a Callas thing, and I must admit, it's not about me. This is, people just love those two singers. And we do both past and present singers. So I try to mix it with singers of the past, both audio and video, and also singers that are currently singing at the Metropolitan Opera. I encourage people to go to the HDs, the live operas that they show. I know at Rockport and Revere and in Boston, various theaters are showing them. The opera, actually can watch it live while it's happening. So, but it's been a wonderful experience. The people in the opera club have taught me to renew my love in opera. It's not old, it's new. And I love, again, reinvention. Always something new, and you learn. We made mistakes. We had problems with audio. Sometimes something would happen with the sound. I'm not an IT guy, but I'm catching up. So all of this it didn't discourage people. They kept coming back, and they loved it. A lot of fun programs.
And opera, really, when you think about it, it seems like it might be aimed at the higher echelon, intelligentsia, academia, but I don't think so. It's for the common man, is it not?
Well, if you take Verdi and Puccini, Verdi wrote for the common man when he was writing Rigoletto and he wrote La Donna Immobile. People were singing it in the streets. It's what today would be considered like popular musical theater. Something that I've learned, and I hear it over and over again, it's not true. I don't know anything about opera. I said, yes, you do. So we did a program on what are the vocations of opera singers in the theater while they're singing that role. So I would put on, for instance, La Boheme. We'd watch the video, they'd watch the English subtitles, and people would say, oh, Mimi's real name is Lucia. She told us in that aria. She lives in a small room. She embroiders flowers. And I said, see, today you learned something about opera. This is what happens with all of us. Truth to tell, Gail, I listen to opera every single day.
You do?
I do. It's next to my cat, my greatest obsession in life. And I do have many, many people in my life. I'm not totally an eccentric, just partially, like my grandfather.
Well, I'd like to know more about Puccini. He's my favorite, too.
I will avoid using too much psychobabble, but it's all about feelings. It's about expression. When you listen to the music, it says something to you. You don't need to know the language. I know it's nice if you do, and it's a different experience. If you speak Italian, you're listening to an Italian opera, you might be able to understand the language, or you do understand the language, and then you would understand what's going on in the opera. But it's far more than that. The music, the feeling is in the music already. The composer's already written that music. He knows, or she knows in some cases, that music is to speak to the heart. That's really what opera's about. Opera's really, in its own time, was what today would be considered pop music.
Have you ever met an opera star?
Well, yes, many.
Really?
Let's put it this way. When I moved to New York in 1975, I went to the opera between 3 and 5 times a week. I lived right down the street from the Metropolitan Opera. I've been to a lot of operas. I've done some work. I've done a number of interviews. I'm doing creating a website for the interviews that I've done with opera singers. I interviewed Renata Scotto, who is probably, without a doubt, the major soprano at the Metropolitan Opera in the 70s, the 1970s. I was involved with writing the discography for her book called More Than a Diva, and she really was more than a diva. She was a great, great, great singer and a wonderful human being. And I've met many singers. Right now I'm friends with a number of opera singers. So to avoid that, because we know what it's like to have brothers and sisters, I won't mention any of them. But there are a couple I love that I keep in touch with on Twitter and Facebook. And I'm going to La Boheme, Puccini, in December to hear Eileen Perez and Michael Fabiano, two wonderful newer singers on the horizon, or they're there now at the Met, in the Zeffirelli production of La Boheme, which is really beautiful.
So a Christmas present to me.
Yes.
is what you're doing for you.
I am. It's 15 days early, but it'll be nice to be there. It'll be nice to be there.
Very good. It sounds wonderful. You have a good life, Howard.
I do.
A very interesting life. You also, in addition to loving opera, you are a student of psychology, I understand.
It's all about the feelings.
It is, isn't it?
Yes. At 57 years old, I decided to liberate myself and admit to people that my obsession next to opera was psychology. I probably will make some enemies here, but I'm a Freudian and of that school. I have worked as a counselor. I'm, at the moment, working on becoming a life coach because it's not over yet.
No, it isn't.
It's not
It
over
isn't.
yet.
It
So
isn't.
something I think that's very important. I have a number of very close friends who are singers. One of them actually lives here in Boston. She's had a career as a singer. She's teaching at New England Conservatory. The amount of sacrifice that singers it's essential. They don't have a choice. They give up so much. You know, they have to worry about getting a cold, being around people who are ill, going to bed early, you know, all of that kind of thing. There's a lot of sacrifice, and I think that when people are less than kind towards a particular singer, they should reevaluate doing that, since it's such an incredible sacrifice. Learning music, you know, I know you are a pianist and a singer, or?
I have sung in the past, but once again, throat surgery did me in. I was in a choral group for a long time, and then the surgery tightened my vocal cords so that I can't really sing the way I used to.
But you're still playing the piano.
I am. I
Very
love
good.
music just as you do. And it is all about the feelings.
Yeah, the feelings, and it's the great healer.
Yes, it is.
When people, I've often thought when I've had a difficulty in life and I go home, and it could be not always opera, but music, and I'm feeling somewhat, whatever that feeling might be, sad or anxious or whatever, music can really reduce all of that into something much better. It'll take away feelings that you don't particularly want. And
That's right. When for example, a musician goes to his or her instrument, they get lost in that.
Absolutely.
They get lost in it, and time just flies when you're playing either piano or the violin or any instrument. And it's the same way with listening to music as well.
Absolutely.
What's coming up for the Opera Club?
We're doing, actually taking a little intermission for December, January. And next year, something I wanted to mention. I received more emails, except for Pavarotti, which I think he was in most of the emails. People love Mario Lanza. And many, many famous tenors today will say that they felt that he had one of the most beautiful voices of all time. He had really, and you know, his life was problematical, to say the least, and perhaps getting into movies, and he only sang one complete opera ever on stage. But Lanza was very, very popular this year. We had a large turnout and people loved it. So for the beginning of next year, we're going to do American singers.
So how shall we encourage people to come to your club? How can we bring more people in?
Well, one of the ways, it's interesting, two things come to mind. One, many friends who have come to the opera who thought they might like it, including some people from Supper Sleuths from the book club, bring friends, and that helps a lot. Also, I want to put out a thank you to especially the Wakefield item for all they've done for the Opera Club. We've gotten wonderful coverage in the last 3 years. And there were a number of stores. I know I'll leave one out, so I'm not going to say which they are. But there were a number of stores in Wakefield that let us put up the poster, which has brought people in as well. So I think that's
Excellent.
helpful. And we do have a website.
Oh, could we have the name of the website?
The website is Opera Club of Wakefield. WordPress.com, I think. I don't know.
You
I'm
know,
not going to get that right.
No, I think that's right. It is a WordPress. Yes,
right.
it is.
If you search Opera Club of Wakefield, it will come up.
It will bring you
come
right
up.
to the site.
Right.
Good.
So, and the website has
Good.
been, we've had a wonderful time. I'm remiss in one thing, I must mention this. I have about 5 or 6 friends now who I've known for over 50 years. And one of the people, Jim Sellers, does all the artwork for the Opera Club of Wakefield, and we've gotten amazing amounts of feedback on that, including some nice press in the Wakefield items. So Jim has done wonderful designs for the website and for our posters, and that's been very, very helpful. Very helpful.
Well, the BB Library, I think, in my own experience, is such a wonderful resource, and so isn't WCAT.
Absolutely.
Two
Absolutely.
fabulous resources right in this little town, and it really is heartening to know that. So many
Absolutely.
good things coming out of 2 organizations.
I do want to say one thing to everybody in the room, because I'm the oldest person here. Never say never. I say every morning, it's a mantra, never say never, because oftentimes the things that people say never are the things that they will do. And so I try to say never. And when I left Wakefield at 18 years old, I went, I'm getting out of here right away. And
now you're back.
Yeah, I was 18. You know, at 18, I didn't make all of my best choices. I was also a child of the 60s, from what I remember. So I moved to Beacon Hill and then Harvard Square. I think that sort of covers the bases on that. So I had a wonderful, wonderful life. I have no regrets.
I'm
no
so
regrets.
glad to hear that.
But I do like coming back to Wakefield, and I feel this is my home. And
Yes.
it was interesting. So, you know, what did I know at 18? I loved opera.
What do any of us know when we're 18? Right.
It's wonderful, isn't it? Liberating. And I think, and I will, you asked me about psychology. The one thing in my life that I've learned that's so important is so important to make mistakes, own them, and move on, and not live in the mistake. It's so important. So, and it's liberating to make a mistake. You know, a mistake once made is a mistake. A mistake twice made is a decision.
Yes.
So I make mistakes, and
we all do.
We all do.
Yes,
and
we
it's
do.
not. It's so much more. The important thing is that we learn from them. You know?
And speaking of mistakes, Howard, I brought piano music with me, and I'm not promising to play it perfectly. I might have a mistake or two, but I wondered if you could identify this aria that I would like to play, and to see if you can tell me the name of it. Would you like to do that?
As long as I don't have to sing it, because then we'll clear
right.
out the room and there'll be nobody to video this.
All right. Well, you know what?
Okay.
I won't sing it either, but I'll play it for you.
That sounds wonderful. I
All
really
right,
enjoyed
we'll
that,
do
Gail.
it.
You're fun. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for being with us today. We've had a wonderful discussion with Howard Hart, and learning all about his Opera Club of Wakefield. And thank you for being with us today. And if anybody would like to be a guest on Family Album, please do not hesitate to reach out through WCAT or at the Wakefield Daily Item. That's where I'm a writer and photographer, and I'd be glad to interview anyone about anything to do with your family. Thank you so much. Howard, I was wondering if you would listen to some music that I'm going to play to see if you can identify it for me. Do you think you could do that?
For sure.
All right.
For sure.
Let's have a go at it.
Sounds good. That is O mio Babino Caro, Loretta's aria from Gianni Schicchi, and she's singing, that's towards the end of the aria, when she says, Father, have pity on me, have pity on me. She's going to throw herself in the Arno if he doesn't let her marry her boyfriend, the guy she likes. So
Very good, and you are
wonderful.
exactly right.
It's wonderful. And it's something that came up that I didn't answer. Was what are the best operas to start with? And I would say definitely my thoughts would be either La Boheme or Madame Butterfly of Puccini or Verdi's La Traviata or Rigoletto. Those are really good ones to start with. Or come to the Opera Club and we'll help you figure it out. I think that's even better. And I'd like to end with one saying that I put on our brochure that we did this year. And it's a thought. Keep it in mind for people who think they can sit at home and watch television and watch PBS operas if it's the same thing. Anytime I can share interests with other people, it goes a long way with feeling at home in the world.
How wonderful. Thank you so much, Howard. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'll end up with a little bit of music for you, see if we can stretch this aria out a little bit more.